ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Rajiv Gandhi Institute for Contemporary Studies, I extend a warm welcome to you at Jawahar Bhavan. My name is Hansa and my co-host is Varun. Let me begin by extending a special and warm welcome to our trustee, Shri Rahul Gandhi, Member of Parliament and Chair of our Advisory Committee. He will be chairing this evening's discussion. A special welcome also to the large number of students, distinguished guests, members of the Council of Ministers, and members of Parliament who are here this evening.
Born in the far-sighted vision of Shri Rajiv Gandhi, the core belief at RGICS is that voice and technology will shape the future. The current focus of our work is on democratizing the policy space by enhancing voice and strengthening the role and capacity of elected representatives, political activists, and common citizens in the development and implementation of policies. Our efforts are also aimed at enhancing the use of technology to find solutions to the challenges we face.
Today is the second lecture in our Cutting Edge series. The aim of the series is to facilitate public discussions on cutting-edge ideas that will shape our future. Today's discussion is on a very exciting idea indeed, the future of the Internet and 1.2 billion empowered Indians. As we all know, India is seen as one of the key economic and cultural engines of the 21st century. However, to realize this potential, 1 billion Indians held back by the gates of asymmetry need to be set free. The Internet can play a crucial role in this by dissolving many of the barriers that exist.
To talk to us on this exciting topic, we are delighted to have with us Dr. Vinton G. Cerf, Vice President and Chief Internet Evangelist for Google. We will begin with remarks from our chair, Shri Rahul Gandhi. We will then have Dr. Cerf's presentation, which will be followed by a question and answer session. Let me now request Shri Rahul Gandhi to come up to the podium and share his thoughts with us.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome Mr. Cerf here, and I can see some of the heavy hitters, Sam, Nandan, Montexi. I'd like to welcome all the youngsters as well. We had a very interesting conversation today. Mr. Cerf asked me, well, actually he stated that, Silicon Valley is full of Indians, and they're so successful when they come there, and they're doing extremely well. And then one of the people sitting at the table said, yes, they're very successful when they go to Silicon Valley, but why do you think they're not so successful in India? Why can't they build the type of businesses and structures that they're able to build? Mr. Cerf gave his ideas and said, these are the 4 or 5 reasons. And then I told him a story to sort of explain the 5th reason. And the story was, I was in England studying, doing my master's, and I think everybody in this room will understand exactly what I'm saying. And there was 3 of us, one Nigerian fellow, friend of mine, me, and an English chap, and we were about to cross the road. The light was green. And the English fellow walked off, and the Nigerian and the Indian fellow stopped, and we looked at the light. The English fellow turned around and said, what are you 2 jokers doing? Why have you stopped? The light is green. And my Nigerian friend said, look, where I come from, if you cross green light, they kill you. They run you over. So, for us, life is very arbitrary. We're used to complexity. Very quickly, every situation an Indian person finds himself in, here in India, extremely complex. You have to deal with the red light. I see the young leaders here, you have to deal with senior leaders. Suddenly someone disrupts your entire life. Everything happens sort of, maybe according to your karma, it's all random. It's not systematic. Whereas in Silicon Valley, things are systematic, things work systematically. So we are very, very good at dealing with complexity. When an Indian person goes to California like Sam did, after some time he doesn't need to look at the green light, he can just walk. And then they can concentrate on what they want to do and what they want to build. I think the challenge for us is try and change that. To try and build structures here that are not random, that are not arbitrary. And that's, I think, what a lot of people in this room would like to see. Finally, I'd like to just end by saying Mr. Cerf told us what he did. I asked him, what have you done actually? You've built this internet, but what is it specifically that you did? And he said, well, what I did was I freed the movement of data. I created a packet of data which could travel anywhere. And I allowed anybody to access it. And then he added, and I did it for free. I didn't take any monetary advantage. I didn't build a company. I did it for free. I think that's a very, very good guide for leadership. Create an enabling environment, let people take advantage of that environment, and sit quietly and watch, and let others take the glory. So I'd like to welcome you here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't get to start yet.
You can start from there, if you like.
Well, first of all, I am deeply honored to be in this institution in particular, and by an introduction from someone whom I have only met recently and have come to admire greatly. Mr. Gandhi reaches to the heart of problems and pulls out their essence. I'm much impressed by that brief conversation that we had this afternoon and your aspirations for this country. I think creating infrastructure that enables others is a very high calling, and it's something that many of you in this room, I think, are already contributing to and have an opportunity to contribute to in the future. I actually was considering retitling this talk, "The Indians Are Coming." And I think that we want that to happen. Everyone in this room, I think, should desire that outcome, that you want to deliver on what should be a destiny of this population, to harness and embrace high technology and make it useful not only for yourselves but for the rest of the world. And we already know you know how to do that. I'll come back to this in a little bit, but I thought we would go back in time momentarily to see what the originator of the system looked like. This is not even the internet. This was the predecessor network called the ARPANET. It was funded by the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, and it was a simple 4-node system. I was a graduate student at UCLA writing software for the Sigma 7 machine in the lower right to connect it to the first node of this very experimental packet switch network. The Sigma 7 is in a museum now, and some people think I should be there too. But the point here is that we started with a very simple idea and explored its ramifications. And to give you a sense for how interestingly we explored this, remember the Defense Department was funding this work. And very quickly we realized that if we were going to use computers to help the military with command and control, they would have to work in mobile vehicles. They were going to have to work in aircraft and ships at sea. And also we needed for these services, these packet switch services, to handle voice and video and radar and other kinds of real-time data. So the pictures that you're seeing here are at the left-hand side. This very nondescript large van had a bunch of $50,000 packet radios. Now, you all carry something in your pocket which didn't cost $50,000, and it's a lot higher speed than these radios were. These things are about a cubic foot. You need to bring them around in a big van. And we had people experimenting with packetized speech. Some of you have used Skype, some have used Google Talk, maybe some of the other things. We were experimenting with this in the 1970s, but we couldn't do very much of it because the capacity of the network was very limited. But our aspirations were very high. I have to tell you that the first time we were doing packet speech with this system, we could not carry a standard digital voice channel, which is 64 kilobits a second. We had to compress the signal down to 1,800 bits a second using something called linear predictive code with 10 parameters. The result of compressing this speech down to 1,800 bits per second is that it lost a certain amount of quality. And it turned out anyone who spoke through the system sounded like a drunken Norwegian. And when the day came for me to demonstrate the systems to some generals at the Pentagon, I remember thinking, how am I going to do this? And then I remembered that one of the parties who was involved in the experiment was from the Norwegian Defense Research Establishment. So we had Ingvar speak through the ordinary telephone system, then we had him speak through the packet voice system, and it sounded exactly the same. But we didn't tell the generals that everybody would sound like that if they talked through the system. Here's another example. This is a ground station in Etam, West Virginia, part of a multi-satellite ground station system that shared a common satellite channel. The mobile radio network, the satellite network, and the original ARPANET were all part of the original Internet. They drove the design because we had separate networks with different data rates, different error rates, different speeds, and we needed to find a way to link them all together in a very, very transparent way. And that was the design of TCP/IP protocols. If we fast forward to today, this is what the Internet looks like from the connectivity standpoint. It is a rich, highly interconnected, hundreds of thousands of networks all interconnected and operating together. This picture is also important for another reason. Every single one of those entities that operates one of those 100 to 400,000 networks is operating completely independently of the others. Some of them are for-profit businesses, some of them are government-owned, some are academic, some are private, and they each make their own decisions about which version of software to use, which hardware. They each decide on a bilateral basis who to connect to. This is a highly distributed system. And part of the reason it works is that it accommodates a very broad range of incentives that each of these operators bring to the table for expansion of their service and for decisions about upgrading software and hardware. So this is a giant collaboration on a global scale. It's not centrally controlled at all. And I think that has given the system its energy. Anyone who wants to become a part of the system is free to invest in building pieces of Internet and finding someone to connect to. In terms of numbers, there are an estimated 900 and some odd million devices on the Internet that are publicly visible. These are machines that you would go to if you were looking for a web page, for example. But this doesn't really tell the whole story, because in the enterprise world, a lot of machines are hidden behind firewalls. A lot of machines are only episodically connected, like laptops, desktops, and especially mobiles and tablets. So the real number of Internet-enabled devices in the Internet is probably in the order of 2 or 3 billion. We don't know for sure because there's no one place where you have to register to be a user. The number of users on the network is estimated to be about 2.4 billion as of January of 2012. By this time, it's probably at least 3 billion. And there are a lot of people who have only recently gotten access to the Internet by use of mobiles, of smartphones. They probably increase the total number of users to some number that might even be as much as 3 or 3.5 billion. We don't know for sure. But it's fair to say that the percentage of mobiles that will be Internet capable, that will be smartphones, will increase over time. Now, as far as where the users are, these statistics have been really fascinating to watch, because over the last decade, Asia has risen very, very rapidly to the top of the absolute population tree here. So there are at least 1 billion people in Asia that are online, and the population penetration is still only 27%. About 500 million of these people are in mainland China, and their penetration is probably around 30% or so. So when India and China and Indonesia and some of the other very populous countries in this area are all penetrated at the same rate as some other parts of the world, we will have many billions of people online, just in Asia alone. Europe has 500 million people online. It's a 63% penetration, but I've given up making any projections about Europe because they keep changing. They're adding countries, so the definition of Europe keeps changing. So it's hard to make any predictions about what's going to happen there. The rest of the statistics are as you see them. I have some statistics which I have been advised are reasonably accurate. The number of estimated number of users of Internet here are 137 million, which is about 11% of the population. The number of data-capable phones is 300 million, but only 80 million have actually been enabled for data, and the number of smartphones is about 27 million. So it's clear that there is plenty of room for serious expansion of access to and use of the Internet. I've shown some other countries that are in the region, and you can see that there's pretty dramatic variation in the penetration of Internet in those countries. But from my point of view, it only stimulates my aspiration to see the Indian penetration rate go up substantially, and for this there has to be some significant investment in communications infrastructure, whether it's fiber or wireless access at the edges of the net. So one of the questions I've been asking myself during my visit here has been this one at the bottom: what steps can be taken to increase Indian access to the net? And what I have learned is that there are strong initiatives and efforts that are in progress to answer that question, to provide fiber capability to every village, to look for ways of enhancing access to wireless capability. I think that we're on the edge of a really big opportunity to try to remove barriers to people's access to the Internet. We need to reduce costs to make it more affordable. We need to take away any barriers to access and sharing of those high-speed resources so that new businesses can be built up and that all the citizens can get access to useful services. There are a lot of things that are happening to the net last year and this year especially, and I put these things up partly to reinforce the understanding that although the design of the net is nearly 40 years old, it was done in 1973, and the operational Internet is 30 years old because we launched it on January 1st, 1983, this is still a very evolving system. It is one which is capable of absorbing new ideas, new functionality, and new capacity, and supporting new applications. So one embarrassing fact is that when Bob Kahn and I did the original design in 1973, by systematic analysis, we concluded that we only needed a 32-bit address space, which would allow for 4.3 billion terminations on the network. Now, in 1973, that sounded like it was a pretty good-sized number, at least to do an experiment. And I thought at the time that if this system worked, that we would then have an opportunity to design the production Internet. Well, the experiment got loose, and so you're using the 1978 Internet design. We ran out of the IP version 4 address space in April of 2011, actually February of 2011. This doesn't mean that the Internet stops. It just means that it gets harder to grow if you need an address in order to run an Internet service. I mean, think of somebody trying to sell you a mobile telephone, and then they say, oh, by the way, it can't make any phone calls because I don't have any telephone numbers available. But this is a really neat little device, isn't it? So Internet has had, since 1996, a new format for its packets with 128 bits of address space. That's 340 trillion addresses, which is a number I'm sure only the Parliament can appreciate. But that system is now propagating into the network. We turned it on officially on June 6th of last year. We've also recognized that there are a lot of languages that are not expressible in Latin characters. A lot of them are right here in India, and so work has been completed to allow non-Latin characters to be in the domain name space. So now we can use a variety of scripts that would be suitable for Indian languages, for example. Another thing which has happened just in the recent few months is the opening up of the top-level domain space. Originally, there were a few hundred, maybe about 300 top-level domains, most of them country codes, and a few of them were generic top-level domains like .net and .com and .org. But the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers opened up applications for new top-level domains. 2,000 of them showed up. So now they're sorting through. Sometimes there were collisions, people who asked for more than one party bidding on the same name, so that all has to get sorted out. Now we're getting into geeky space here, and I'll try not to go too deep, but I do want to say that all of us know that there are security issues associated with the network, that there are viruses and worms and Trojan horses. There are things that interfere with the domain name system and cause people to end up in the wrong places on the net. There are a variety of steps that are being taken now to make the network more secure. Those technologies are propagating through the system. Some of them go in the host, some of them go in the clients, some of them go in your laptops, desktops, and mobiles, improved operating systems, improved browser technology to be more resistant to various kinds of attack. This process needs to continue, and it would not surprise me, in fact, I would be disappointed if our Indian colleagues didn't come up with some pretty smart ways of improving the security and safety of the network. I'm going to touch on some of these other points later in the slides, so I'll skip past that. But I do want to bring up this notion called the Internet of Things. These are devices that have become Internet-enabled. And I will confess to you over the last 40 years that it never occurred to me that a picture frame would be part of the Internet. But in fact, these are little devices that have programs and have computers in them that can reach through the network and download images, store them, and then cycle through them. This is actually pretty wonderful. If you're a grandparent and you want to know what are the grandchildren doing, your sons and daughters would take pictures of the grandchildren, upload them to a website, and your picture frame downloads those pictures. And when you get up in the morning, you just watch the pictures cycle through and you get an idea of what your grandchildren are up to. So we do this in my family, except I don't have any grandchildren. That's a complaint I have to take to my two sons. They haven't figured out something, and it's probably our fault. But one thing I would like to point out, though, is that the website that these pictures are being downloaded from, if it is attacked and penetrated, the consequence might be that the grandparents will see pictures of what they hope is not the grandchildren. So security is really important at home as well as it is at work. There are devices now that look like telephones, but they're actually voice-over IP computers. Now, over on the left-hand side, this is an Internet-enabled refrigerator. It has a nice touch-sensitive display on the front. And I don't know whether Indian families do what American families do, but for many, many years, the way we communicated with each other at home was the pieces of paper with magnets on the front of the refrigerator. We had pictures that the kids had drawn and little notes saying, don't forget to go pick up the shoes at the repair shop. So now with these Internet-enabled refrigerators, you have the ability not only to put things on the front of the refrigerator, but we can email each other, we can put up our websites, we can blog, and we can do all kinds of other things. But the more interesting possibility is that if we could put little RFID chips on the things that go into the refrigerator would know what it has inside. And the consequence of that is that while you're off at work or at school, the refrigerator could be surfing the Internet looking for recipes that it knows it could make with what you have inside. So when you come home, you would see a list of recipes that you could have for dinner. Now, you can extrapolate this. You can imagine that you're on vacation and you get an email. It's from your refrigerator. It says the milk was put in there 3 weeks ago, and it's going to crawl out on its own now if you don't do something. Or maybe you're shopping and you get an SMS, it's your refrigerator calling, don't forget the marinara sauce. I have everything else we need for spaghetti dinner tonight. And I'm sorry to tell you that our Japanese friends have really spoiled this beautiful image. They've invented an Internet-enabled bathroom scale. So when you step on the scale, it figures out which family member you are, and it sends that information to the doctor, and it becomes part of your medical record, all of which is perfectly reasonable. There's only one problem. The refrigerator is on the same network. And when you come home, you see diet recipes on the display, or maybe it just refuses to open because it knows you're on a diet. So this doesn't sound like the kind of future that we want. Now, there's there's a fellow in the middle here that I've not met. He's Dutch. And he has invented an internet-enabled surfboard. And all I can imagine is that he was sitting on the water waiting for the next wave, thinking, if I had a laptop in my surfboard, I could be surfing the internet while I'm waiting to get... So he installed a laptop in his surfboard, he put a Wi-Fi service in the rescue shack on the beach, and he now sells this as a product. And finally, I used to tell jokes about internet-enabled light bulbs, thinking, you know, someday every light bulb will have its own IP address. I can't tell jokes about this anymore because a few weeks ago, I received in the mail an internet-enabled light bulb with LED lights and an IPv6 radio inside. This is not an inexpensive product. It costs about $15, but it will last about 15 years because it's LEDs rather than incandescent or fluorescent. And this means that it can be controlled remotely. You can tell what state it's in. You can turn it off, turn it on. So I can't tell jokes anymore about internet-enabled light bulbs. I'm going to have to find some new material. So this Internet of Things is absolutely coming. Later I'll say a little bit more about the American Smart Grid Program, which just reinforces this whole notion. I mentioned briefly that, or at least one of the slides mentioned, that sensor networks are becoming a part of the Internet environment. It's not at all uncommon now to have a sensor network which is reporting its state and maybe even accepting control remotely through the Internet. So it could be ventilation and air conditioning, it could be security, it could be other kinds of reporting going on about the status of a building, or and it could be a residence, or it could be an office building, or it could even be a manufacturing facility. So these kinds of sensor networks are going to become a part of the Internet environment as well. This happens to be a picture of the sensor network I have in my house. It's an IPv6 radio network. Now, this is not me with a soldering gun in the garage. This is actually a commercial product. I got it from a company called Archrock, which was acquired by Cisco Systems a couple of years ago. This system has little mobile-size sensors that run on 2 AA cells. They last nearly a year. And they're sitting in each room in the house, and every 5 minutes they wake up and they measure the light levels, the temperature, and the humidity in each room, and they report that to a server down in the basement. Now, I know it sounds like something only a geek would do, but I'm an engineer, and I believe in real data, and at the end of the year, I have all this data about how well the heating and ventilation and air conditioning work in each room in the house. So when it comes time to adjust the system, I don't have to rely on anecdotal information. I have real engineering data to do this. Now, one room in the house is a wine cellar, and it's very important to me to keep the temperature below 60 degrees Fahrenheit. So if the room warms up beyond 60 degrees, I get an SMS on my mobile. This has happened a few times when the power has failed. And occasionally when this has happened, no one is at home to reset the cooling system, and so I keep getting these notes every 5 minutes from my system saying, your wine is warming up. So once I was away for 2 or 3 days, and I kept getting this warning that my wine was warming up, so I called the Archrock guys and I said, do you make remote actuators? And they said yes, and they said, are they strongly authenticated? And I want to make sure that I'm the only one that can do this, not the 15-year-old next door whom I don't want messing around with my wine cellar. And they said yes. So that was a weekend project to install. And then I got to thinking, you know, I can actually tell if someone's gone into the wine cellar when I'm not there because I can see if the lights have gone off and on, but I don't know what they did in there. So this led me to decide that I should put RFID chips on every wine bottle. And then I can do an instantaneous inventory to see if any bottles have left the wine cellar without my permission. And I was proudly explaining this design to one of my engineering friends who said, you have a bug in your design. What do you mean I have a bug in my design? He said, well, you could go into the wine cellar and drink the wine and leave the bottle. So he was right. Now we have to put sensors in the cork. And as long as we're going to do that, we might as well sample the esters that give the flavor to the wine. and see what condition it's in. So now, before you open the bottle, you interrogate the cork. And if that's the wine that got up to 80 degrees Fahrenheit because of the cooling system failure, that's the bottle you give to somebody who doesn't know the difference. So this is a very practical thing to have. In honesty, lots and lots of these sensor systems will become part of the Internet environment because they will help us observe, measure, and manage the way in which we use non-renewable and renewable resources. It will help us understand how our choices, our lifestyle choices, affect our use of these important resources. So I'm anticipating that we will see many, many hundreds of millions of these systems too. It's my belief that there are many business opportunities nascent in the network which will someday come to India. We already know that you understand information technology. The companies that have outsourced IT services to places where the Internet is already heavily invested is a very, very important indicator, because it shows that your colleagues have figured out that they can service demand even if it isn't domestic. And that's been a very, very important lesson. So we already know you understand this. The question is, can we take advantage of that understanding and grow a domestic market too by injecting Internet capability around the country? Now, the reason that this works at all is that there are standards, there are platforms, servers, cloud-based systems and the like that create interoperability. Standards are absolutely key here, because what they do is create interoperability which you would have had to get by a bunch of bilateral negotiations with a lot of different parties to make sure things would interwork. By everyone observing the same set of standards, now you know that just like when you connect your computer to something on the Internet, you can get to all 900 million machines because you know that they all speak the same language. So we should be taking advantage of that, and people have. The result of the standards is that third parties like Infosys and Wipro and others have managed to offer services to people across the network because of those standards. You can imagine a variety of things like mobile applications. How many people are taking advantage of hundreds of thousands of apps on their mobiles? Well, lots and lots of people have created those applications because there were standards for designing the app that would work on all the mobiles. So this is, again, taking advantage of a standard to allow lots and lots of people to exercise their creativity. That's sort of the essence of what I hope can happen here. There remains to be done some pretty interesting standards making. For example, there are lots of different clouds. Google has a cloud, Microsoft has a cloud, Amazon has a cloud, IBM makes private clouds, but they don't interwork with each other. We're sort of in the same place in the cloud world that we were in 1973 when there were proprietary computer networks that didn't interconnect with each other. So this is a big opportunity. We can now start exploring what does it mean to interconnect the clouds together, move data back and forth from one cloud to another. Before the Internet was in place, you could be sitting on a network and there was no way to say, send this data to another network. You couldn't even say what the other network's name was. There wasn't any vocabulary for that. The same is true for clouds now. So there's a big opportunity. Something else which, something that has been contributed to by some of your colleagues, and that's using the Internet to deliver educational material to a large number of people simultaneously. My colleagues at Google, Peter Norvig and Sebastian Thrun, are adjunct professors at Stanford University. And last year, they decided they would like to teach a course in artificial intelligence on the net. And they thought maybe they would get 500 people to sign up. In fact, 160,000 people signed up all around the world. And the next course that was offered, there were 395,000 people signed up. Well, this is a sort of what do we do now problem. And the answer is that they rewrote a lot of the software in order to cope with scale. 23,000 people of the 160,000 actually passed the course. And although some people will say, see, it was really terrible, only a small fraction, 1/8 of the people passed the course, I did the other back of the envelope calculation. 23,000 people completing that course was more students than have ever taken that course in the history of Stanford University since Stanford started teaching computer courses in one swell FOOP. So there is a big opportunity here, and once the infrastructure is in place, education is going to be much more reachable to people who otherwise would not have access to it. These courses are free right now. There are some issues about what business model will allow them to be sustainable. But the fact of the matter is they are a very, very efficient way of delivering substantial quality information to very large numbers of people. Another thing which is a big issue these days, of course, is internet infrastructure and telecommunications. And here again, there are paths towards creating infrastructure here in India which are being pursued, and I'm really eager to see all of this happen. Now, I wanted to move to another topic, which is what we call in the U.S. the smart grid. This was an initiative that started 4 years ago, initiated by the Department of Commerce and the Department of Energy. Their idea was to take energy-consuming devices, electricity-consuming devices, and have them do two things. The first thing was to report their usage and accumulate that so that when you got your bill at the end of the month, you could actually figure out which appliances consumed that electricity. What did you do to cause that bill to be what it was? The second thing that they wanted to do is to make these devices, especially the ones that consume a lot of electricity, like air conditioning or heating, water heating, or washing machines and things like that, to receive advice. For example, please don't run the water heater for the next 10 minutes. We're reaching a peak load, and if we can clip that peak load, then we won't have to use expensive additional peak load power generation capacity. Instead, we'll clip the load. So this is called demand response. Up until now, there has been no capability to do that. All you could do was either meet the demand by generating power with peak load capacity or suffer rolling brownouts and blackouts. So this notion of being able to manage demand is a very, very interesting point, and it saves not only money, but it also saves efficiency. If you build peak load generation power, generation capacity, and it only gets used 2 or 3% of the time, the cost per kilowatt hour of that generation capacity is very, very high. If you can clip the load, you never spend the money. So there are a lot of details here, but the idea is that the smart grid is intended to allow a variety of devices to be able to report their status, to accept some kind of control. And once you have those standards in place, you can have third parties that are capable of managing some of these systems for you. Okay, so now there is a really interesting problem. If you go down here to consumption and production, the original designs were very much focused on devices that consume electricity. But we're entering a period, certainly in the U.S., and I don't know about here, where we are looking at a variety of new ways of generating power, whether it's wind power or solar power, geothermal power, and more recently we have electric automobiles with large storage capacity. And in a sense, if they're connected to the grid, under some conditions they can actually put power back in the grid as opposed to simply consuming it. So suddenly we have the possibility of both pushing power, generating and pushing power into the grid from the edges, in addition to pulling power from central sites. And it is leading to the idea that maybe we shouldn't be building large-scale power plants that are very expensive, and rather build a larger number of smaller power plants, maybe even going down into neighborhoods. These kinds of technologies allow a much more distributed generation of power. This may produce a much more reliable environment where you don't have one power outage caused by the loss of one big, giant production plant. And also, if the power isn't being pushed as far over the power lines, you don't have as much loss. So there may be some really interesting, more distributed ways of generating power once we have the ability to manage these kinds of systems. The Japanese are actually pursuing another rather interesting idea, and for those of you who might be electrical engineers or who are interested in significant departures from normal, the Japanese are looking at essentially a power internet where you can assess demand for power and distribute the power in almost the same way that we distribute packets in the internet environment. It's not quite packets of power, but it's very close to that. So the idea is to build a much more distributed system, and they're pursuing that as well. So there are all kinds of business opportunities here that I would like to draw to your attention. Some of you are already in this business. But wireless is going to be important because it's a great way to do the last mile after you get off the optical fiber network. Another thing which I think is really important is that if we do increase access to the internet, it's going to be important that there's some useful information for the citizens to get access to. There's also a real need to present that information in local languages so that it's assimilable. One thing which I think is very exciting is that the plans here in India for propagating the fiber network to the villages have also come together with propagating information to those citizens from the government. So getting access to government information about what do I do to get a passport, what do I do to get my car registered, what do I do to register my business, what local businesses are there in the area that I can turn to. All of that local kinds of information is what makes the internet useful to people, and that has to be an opportunity to generate new kinds of business as well. Another thing which I've already implied is that you can export services to places where internet is already heavily penetrated while you are working on getting a domestic penetration to become a market to consume those services as well. It's pretty clear that the ability to move money around can be a lubricant in e-commerce. And you can even imagine moving electronic money around can be a lubricant for conventional commerce too. If you're moving goods and services and you make it easy for people to pay electronically, you eliminate the need for the cash economy. You make actually a much more reliable way of making sure money doesn't disappear where it shouldn't. So these online transfers can remove a lot of the problems that we experience in a cash economy. A thing that I find interesting is the idea of vendors and buyers and marketplaces. Internets are a really powerful way, together with cloud-based systems, for doing exactly this, finding buyers and vendors. I had the opportunity to visit some people in a village outside of New Delhi, and two of the people I talked to were an electrician and a plasterer. And we asked them about how they found business, and it was almost always word of mouth. They didn't have any way of making it known other than this very direct way that they had products and services that were available. If they could be found through the internet, then their businesses could certainly grow, because part of the problem in a business is finding customers. So this is another possibility. And finally, I met with two 12-year-olds who are using the internet in 6th grade. Some of them are using it to compose responses to homework assignments. One young fellow was actually a budding artist. He was using a digital program to do some really impressive artwork. So I asked them, what do you think the internet should be like 5 years from now? What would you want it to be like? And I would be afraid to answer that question. People ask me, and I don't have a clue. The instantaneous response was they wanted the internet to talk to them, and they wanted to talk back to it in their local languages. I mean, this is a 12-year-old speaking. I think I need to get a T-shirt made that says, "Don't look now. There's a 12-year-old, catching up with you." So this idea of having language understood by computers is actually on the cutting edge of technology today. At Google, we have a project called Project Glass. This is something that looks like a pair of glasses, but it has a television receiver. It has a little projector that only you can see. You have to look up over here, and you can see a screen just like you would see on a laptop or your mobile. It has a microphone, and it has a little ear set that you can hear from. And the idea here is to have the computer be part of your sensory environment. So it's hearing what you hear, it's seeing what you see, it's trying to learn from that, and it's trying to be helpful. It might be able to interpret gestures that you make, like, what's that building over there? Where's the nearest petrol station? What does this menu mean? I don't know how to read it. There are programs that will translate things. If you can see the image and correctly interpret the image and translate it, you can look. And in my case, if I was looking at something in, in Hindi, I would need help. And so my Google Glass would be a way of assisting with that. These are all feasible. They take some serious development work, but we're moving ahead at Google on these things, and I'm sure that some of your colleagues could do the same. So if I had to summarize what the most critical elements are that have made the Internet successful, one of them is the standards are very open. Anyone is free to contribute. The Internet Engineering Task Force is the place where most of the standards in the Internet are developed. And it's a rather funny organization because you can't join it. There's no place to go to sign up. All you can do is show up. And if you show up and you have ideas that other people find of interest, then something will happen. If they find your ideas are not of interest, then nothing will happen. But you don't have to sign up. You don't have to pay a membership fee. You just have to show up. Another thing is that the interoperability of various platforms makes the Internet a very fertile place in which to invent new applications because they can propagate very, very rapidly. Neutrality here is really important. And by this I mean that there is equal access to any party who wishes to use these resources, who wishes to put up new products and services. It's a very interesting fact that you don't have permission to put up a new product or service on the Internet. I can guarantee you when Larry Page and Sergey Brin were doing the Google service that they didn't have to go around to every Internet service provider in the world to get permission. All they had to do was put the service up and use it. Finally, I want to point out that there's a very interesting difference between the telephone system and the Internet system. In the telephone system, it's kind of asymmetric. If you make a phone call, you pay for everything between you and the person who receives the call, including settlement and termination charges. In the Internet, it's very different. You pay the local Internet service provider to be on the net, and after that, you start exchanging packets and running whatever applications you want to. All the stuff that goes on in between, you don't have to worry about, because that's worked out among the other networks. So in the interest of time, since I've been going on now for 45 minutes, I want to skip to my last little bit, and that's to tell you the status of a project called the Interplanetary Internet. When this first came up in 1998, people thought I was, had finally gone over the top. The honest answer, though, is that my colleagues at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory were thinking about the Mars lander that was called Pathfinder. It was a small little robot that had landed in 1997, and we were thinking, okay, it's 1998 now, the next year. What should we be doing with technology that will be needed in 25 years? And so we started thinking about the future plans for sending robotic systems to Mars. And as we thought more and more about this, we thought, well, we really need rich networking, just like we have in the Internet, where you can plug into the net and talk to 900 million things, and you don't have to worry about how they all got there. The network takes care of that. Instead of using point-to-point radio links, we wanted to have this rich networking capability for space exploration. We thought we could use the TCP/IP protocols, and that idea lasted for about 5 minutes, and then we realized there are a couple of problems. One problem is that the speed of light is too slow, and we haven't figured out how to fix that. So the problem is the distance between the planets is so big that between Earth and Mars is 20 minutes one way and 40 minutes round trip time when we're farthest apart in our orbits. And even when we're closest together, it's 7 minutes of round trip time. The TCP/IP protocols weren't designed to deal with that kind of delay. Then we have another problem that's called celestial motion. The planets are rotating, and we haven't figured out how to stop that either. So when you're talking to something on the surface and the planet rotates, after a while you can't talk to it until it comes back around again. So this is variable delay and disruption. So we had to invent a set of protocols that would handle this variable delay and disruption, which we have now done. We've iterated several times. They're on board the orbiters around Mars. They are on the landers on Mars, the old rovers, the Spirit and Opportunity, and the new lander that arrived in August of this year, Curiosity. And it was also on board Phoenix, which landed on Mars and the North Pole in 2008. So our purpose now is to standardize the protocols so that any spacefaring nation could use them if they want to. And once they finish the mission on a particular robot, for example, they could repurpose that spacecraft to become part of an interplanetary backbone. So we're imagining that as missions are launched one at a time, if these protocols are used, eventually those spacecraft will become part of a growing interplanetary backbone. And that, for me, is very exciting because it will make it possible to support both manned and robotic missions to the outer planets. Now, there is one more little bit to this. The Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, which supported the original ARPANET and the Internet and the interplanetary architecture, has now released a project, funding for a research project on the design of a spacecraft to reach the nearest star in 100 elapsed years. Now, this poses three problems. Problem number one is propulsion. The current propulsion systems would take 65,000 years to get to Alpha Centauri, which is 4.4 light years away. That's a little long, even for an ARPA experiment. That's 6 times longer than our civilizations have been around. So that's problem number one. We'll probably end up using some kind of a really large-scale ion-pulsed engine. The second problem is navigation. The stars aren't where you think they are because it takes light time to get there, and by the time the light gets there, the stars have moved. So I got really worried. I thought, well, this poor spacecraft is going to get part of the way to Alpha Centauri. It's a light year away, and I'm going to try to tell it what to do mid-course correction. It takes a year for the signal to get there and another year to find out did it work or not. And so, this is not a real-time proposition. Fortunately, we know a lot about the proper motion of the stars, and we've concluded that the navigation actually can be done autonomously on board the spacecraft. So that problem is pretty much solved. Then the final problem, the one I'm most interested in, is called communications. And the question is, how do you generate a signal from 4 light years away that you can actually detect? So because this is a finite-sized spacecraft. I mean, it's not like, somebody else's star, and you can't put a big blinder on the star and blink it like a seismograph or telegraph or something. So anyway, we have to figure out how do we generate a signal that can be detected from 4 light years away. And we've been looking at lasers, very, short burst femtosecond lasers. The problem is that even with a very, very high power short burst, you're still sending the light wave 4 light years away. And by the time it gets to the planet, or it gets here to the solar system, it's actually about the size of the solar system because of the beam spread. So now you know why I want the interplanetary backbone, and so I can build a synthetic aperture receiver the size of the solar system so I can pick up the signal. But one of the physicists said, there's another possibility. Everybody knows that gravity bends light. So the sun has a big gravity field. And if you go 550 astronomical units away from the sun, that's the focal plane of the sun's gravity field. So you could use a gravity lens in order to focus the light coming from Alpha Centauri. So if we can figure out how to get a spacecraft out to that distance away from the sun, we've never been that far away, we can actually use a gravity lens instead of having to use the big interplanetary backbone. So that's the up-to-the-date story on interstellar exploration. I appreciate very much the time to talk, and I'm happy to try to respond to questions, and I am very, very grateful to be here with you this evening. Thank you. Okay, so I should go in. Yeah.
Thank you very much, sir. We will now turn to the question and answer session. I request Mr. Gandhi to kindly chair the session.
Are there questions? I guess. Maybe not. Well, maybe you and I can invent.
Why don't you just suggest that people should ask questions?
Yeah. So the field is open for questions now.
Oh, there's a question right there, but we need to get a microphone.
We have come a long way from envelope, postage stamp, postcard, and now email. There is a fierce competition between Yahoo and Google's. Can you tell us that how far we will go and what new inventions are there in the way? And secondly, how can we use Google's for our next election 2014?
So actually, I'm sorry. Is this on?
Yeah.
Okay. So, by the way, let me explain. I'm hearing impaired, and so I'm trying to use your PA system to hear the questions. Though I may struggle a little bit. I hope you'll forgive me. I may have to ask your help. So anyway, Google, you all understand that the Google system was organized to do one thing, and that was to organize the world's information and make it accessible and useful. Among the things that we've been experimenting with organizing is information of political interest. So we have a number of politicians who have been very interested in using the Internet to communicate with their potential constituents, to get feedback from them. The White House recently announced a process whereby if you get enough signatures on a petition, 100,000 now, that they would respond. And they put themselves on the spot and said that there are enough people interested in the answer to that question that they will undertake to respond. It's also very clear, at least in the U.S., that President Obama has made very, very good use of these kinds of online systems, not just Google, but generally on the Internet, in order to organize information to provide to constituents and also to communicate with them. Now, I have to tell you, though, that there was a very interesting experience as the Internet became visible in the early 1990s. Politicians didn't pay too much attention until somewhere around 1998 or so. They suddenly recognized that it was a mechanism for getting information out to their constituents. And so web pages started showing up, blogs started showing up. Then they discovered that it wasn't just a one-way system, and the constituents were actually communicating back to them. I mean, it's a bit of a shock. And the consequence of this, I think, is a recognition that democracy is a two-way street, and that you can't just tell your constituents things, you have to be ready to respond to them as well. You know this already, I'm sure. So the Internet has created a platform for this kind of political dialogue. It also, in a sense, has become a spotlight because it's very hard to hide from information that's readily and widely available to everyone. And so this spotlight, I think, is a kind of a transparency tool that creates accountability within the political system. I'm sure it could be better than it is now, but it is an inescapable fact that once information is available, it's very hard to ignore that. So I really see this as an interesting democratizing tool, and it's also an opportunity to create dialogue where dialogue doesn't exist. There are voices that could not be heard before that can be and should be heard to help shape policy. There's a mantra around my community about multi-stakeholder governance, and it's all about letting the people who are affected by policy to have something to say about that as the policy is being formed. And I cannot imagine a more important way of exercising democratic principles than to assure that those voices are heard. Thank you. I'll have to leave it to whoever is running around with the microphones. There's a gentleman here.
Hello.
And is there, there's a microphone over there. So we'll have to do this in order of microphone arrival. Sir, yes, you're on, and then the next one is over here.
There's information and there's misinformation.
Yes.
So how does, the internet is free, it's open, it's uncontrolled. How does one deal with this problem? Obviously, it raises many issues across the board.
It's a wonderful question, and I thank you for that. First observation I would make is that the Internet is not the only source of misinformation. movies, television, radio, magazines, the newspapers, your friends and your parents and your kids are all sources of misinformation, a lot of it not intentional. Some of it is ignorance, some of it is simply a mistake. Some of it's maybe deliberate. I mean, I'm sorry to say that in political terms, there's a lot of misinformation that's put out there on purpose for political reasons. So the question now is how to deal with that. The answer that most of us in my world have adopted is not to suppress the information, but to respond with more information. Now, the response doesn't necessarily help anyone unless you're prepared to take on a responsibility yourselves, and that's called critical thinking. That's called examining the information and deciding whether to accept or reject it, to ask questions about what's its origin, what is the basis for the assertions that are being made. Now, I think about people who have children and they worry about the internet. I do understand that there's content on the net that you would prefer the children didn't see. And there are ways of dealing with that. Google tries, for example, with filters that will control the content that comes back from a search, but you can adjust that. The edges of the net can be adjusted to say, in our case, filter everything out except that which we think is safe, or filter things a little less than that, or don't filter anything at all. So we call that safe search, moderate, and unfiltered. But the edge gets to decide that. I cannot imagine a better gift to every child than to teach them how to think critically. They're going to need it in education. They're going to need it in daily life. They're going to encounter content of all kinds from all sources. The internet makes it a little stark because you see, web page A with terrible information and web page B with and that's how I would generally approach the problem. So there's someone back there who just got a microphone. Okay. Yes, sir.
Mr. Cerf, you've been very generous in creating an incredible medium that you've done apparently for free, and it's wonderful to put that out there. But a lot of people who have manufactured original content, proprietary content, which are very upset with this medium, what would you say to them?
The people who create proprietary content.
People who make proprietary content, anything, music, movies,
yes.
news, anything.
Okay, so the first observation I would make is that not all the content that is produced by people is motivated by a pecuniary response. In fact, the thing that was most interesting about the advent of the World Wide Web is that this avalanche of information appeared around 1994 or 95, created by people who were not interested in being paid for it. They just wanted to know it was useful for someone else, and that's still the case. That doesn't mean that there aren't people who also produce information that would like to be paid for it. But the internet is this big tent, and it allows everything from public domain information all the way over to fully copyright protected. And so there is, of course, a problem because the people with the copyright protected material would like to keep it that way. And there are a variety of attempts to do that. So digital management, digital rights management for access to copyright material has been a mixed bag. And the reason is that it really interferes with people's convenience. And some of the producers of content have concluded that putting in DRM capability made the people who were actually willing to pay and wanted to pay so angry that they wouldn't buy it at all. And I'm not suggesting that we should abandon the protection of intellectual property, far from it. But I think we should appreciate that there is a fairly broad range of choices for the creators of works. There is something called Creative Commons, which my good friend Larry Lessig invented, which gives the author a wide range of choices other than just pure copyright protection. And I think we need to adapt to that. The other thing that is quite frankly the case is that once things are in digital form, it's pretty easy to duplicate and distribute them. This is just a fact. Think about the way the World Wide Web works. What does your browser do? It goes out to the net and copies a file, and then it interprets it. It's a giant copying machine. I guess anybody who's trying to create intellectual property is sort of terrified by that thought, but that's the way it works. So the alternative to being to trying to replicate previous media control, it's expensive to copy paper, expensive to copy DVDs, maybe to reposition the business model associated with that intellectual property. iTunes is a frequently mentioned example of this, where Apple figured out that maybe people didn't want to buy an album, maybe they wanted to buy one track on the album, so why not let them and charge them 99 cents instead of $12 or $15 or $20. You can still buy the album if you want all of the tracks, or you can buy one track at a time. I don't want to overuse that analogy because movies you probably don't want to buy one scene of. Mostly you want to see the whole movie. Similarly with books, I'd like to read all the way to the end as opposed to, up to the last chapter. But there are notions that will help you get past this. For example, subscription is a really interesting tactic. Every magazine in the world that has a subscription arrangement in it is trading on the fact that the subscriber believes the next issue is going to have interesting content. And I'm willing, based on brand or based on recommendations, to pay that subscription ahead of time in the expectation that I will get utility out of it. I'm not suggesting, again, that that's the only tactic, but I want people to think about business models that have to work and adapt into this online environment. I'm very conscious of the fact that I'm sitting here with this microphone, and you're sitting here without a microphone, and you surely must have an opinion on some of these things, and I've never known a politician that could stand being away from an open mic. So could I ask if you would like to respond to some of these too?
I'll interject if I do. I'm okay with not responding to that one, but if there's a question that I feel I can help with, I will.
Wow. Okay, thank you for that.
Okay, Mr.
Yeah, go for it.
I am from academic fraternity. I am from Jamia Millia University. You have mentioned in one of the clips that is the massive open online courses. And you have also mentioned about the Khan Academy and Udacity and the Coursera etc. Can you tell us, elucidate a little bit about the utility of the internet for the academic purpose?
Academic purpose.
Academic purpose.
So we got a little tiny bit into that with these MOOC things, this massive online open coursework. The Khan Academy was one of the first to burst on the scene with very, very simple, almost humble lessons that you could look at on YouTube. I mean, it's almost endearing to watch those lectures because you see how to solve problems, how to work problems. So a very interesting phenomenon happened after my colleagues did this big AI course. Stanford University's president, John Hennessy, is absolutely determined to find a way to make this large-scale courseware and course content widely available. And he wants Stanford to be part of that. MIT opened up their lecture material quite some time ago, and I remember somebody said, "Are those guys crazy? That course material is exactly why people go to MIT and pay a lot of money. So why would they do that?" And so I asked, I said, what motivated you to put all that course material up there? And they said, look, it's really simple. We show them what we've got. If they already understand this material, there's no point in coming to MIT. If they don't understand it, they realize they have to come to MIT to learn it. So, I thought that was a pretty clever tactic. Now, something interesting has happened at Stanford. Not all the professors are really thrilled with this, MOOC stuff. But the ones who get it have decided to invert the normal classroom practice. They record their lectures. They're up on the net. The students can watch the lectures as many times as they want to, as opposed to asking the professor to repeat himself. So these students watch these things once, twice, 3 times, whatever they want. When they get into the classroom, they work problems. And the thing which is powerful about that is there's nothing more instructive than seeing how somebody solves a problem. The next best thing is to solve the problem yourself. And I have to say, solving problems is a great way to learn. Teaching people how to solve problems is a great way to learn, and I don't know about you, but I've been asked to teach classes that I sort of know something about, and I discover instantly when I try to teach it how little I actually know about it, so I learn more than the students do as a result. I think that the ability to get this high-quality content out to a large population of users is a really powerful lever. Now, let me go away from the pedagogy for a second. What else can we do with these systems? One of the things we can do is allow people to collaborate more effectively. And at Google, we're big fans of sharing of content, sharing of databases, sharing of computing resources, working concurrently in a collaborative environment where multiple parties can see the result of a simulation, can see a presentation from big data and analytics from big data, and then can discuss, debate, analyze, and come to conclusions. So this is another engine for collaborative work. In the long run, one of the things I hope these cloud-based systems do is allow us to preserve our digital heritage for our descendants. This leads me to one final observation on this topic. It's called bit rot. Every one of us who uses application programs to create spreadsheets or text documents or reports or simulations and so on creates complicated files of data. And we store them away, and we pull them back, and they are meaningful because the software that created them is available to us to interpret and present and allow us to interact. If the software goes away for some reason, the bits are like a pile of rotten bits because there's nothing you can do with them until you have access to software that can interpret it. This problem is already with us. You and I invest in the production of a lot of content, and if the application program doesn't work on the next version of the operating system, or the next version of the application isn't backward compatible, our investment in those bits is lost. I am very, very worried that between now and 2100, our descendants, 80 years from now, will wonder about us because most of the traces of what we've done in this beginning of the 21st century are in digital form and they will be lost. We can't let that happen. What we need is digital vellum. And it is not just a technical problem. We have to figure out what to do about intellectual property rights with regard to application software and the operating systems they rely on, so that when people go out of business, when they decide they don't want to support this software anymore, you can say, you must not allow that software to disappear. You must have a way of keeping it in operation so I can preserve the material that I built with it. So cloud systems may actually turn out to be a part of the solution, because you can imagine emulating the hardware that runs the operating system, that runs the application that interprets the bits. And so you may be able to preserve the ability to look at content that was created on earlier computers and operating systems. I have to tell you one more anecdote. I remember sitting in a room like this with a bunch of librarians, and we were talking about the bit rot problem. And some young kid gets up. That's anybody that's younger than I am is a kid, right? So anyway, the young kid gets up and he says, oh, this isn't a problem. The important stuff will be moved into other media and it will be mapped into the new applications, and that will be fine. And the stuff that wasn't important will go away and no one will care. After he finished his speech, it took us a half an hour to get the librarians off the ceiling, because they said, excuse us, but you don't know what's important and what isn't important. Some of it won't appear to be important until 200 or 300 years later. So they were emphasizing how important the solution to this problem is. And it's going to take the lawyers, the intellectual property people, the technologists, the librarians, and probably some others to figure out how to actually solve that problem. But solve it we must.
It's actually a roundabout question. and an observation. You can look at a university as an institution that provides access to information. So that's one way of looking at it. And you can also look at it as an institution that excludes. Because not everybody can get to Harvard University.
Yes.
Or not everybody can get to Stanford, or not everybody can, in India, get to a university. So if you're a poor person sitting in a village in India and you look at a university, one of the thoughts that goes through your mind is that that's an institution that actually excludes me, because I'll never get there. Right? And the reason it does that is because the university actually cannot scale. So Harvard University cannot go to 1 million students or 2 million students at the quality with which they can go to 2,000 or 3,000 students. What is going to happen? Well, okay, one other thing, which is that the university is actually a 20th century institution, or the DNA of the university comes from 200-300 years ago. The DNA, right? The physical structure,
Yes.
the courses,
Okay.
the departments, all that. What is going to happen 30, 40 years from now to this institution called the university? I mean, one step of the university is already in the corporate world. Another step is, sitting in Silicon Valley in the financial world. So is this structure going to explode, or is this structure going to realign itself? And how is that going to work?
So first of all, do I remember correctly that the University of Bologna was founded around 1100?
Yeah.
So it's nearly 1,000 years.
No, Taxila was more than 2,000, 3,000 years ago.
Wow.
Buddhist
Okay.
university.
So one possible answer to this question is that Darwin was right, and that you only have two choices in life: you either adapt or you die. And it may very well be that some universities won't figure out how to adapt, and that's why John Hennessy was so determined to figure out how to harness and make use of this new large-scale capacity, this scaling capability. Part of the scaling, by the way, comes from the fact that there are computer programs that can help you with evaluating the student progress and everything else. So one answer, almost glib answer, is that some universities will adapt and some won't. I think that the interesting question that has arisen is whether the university experience, which historically has tended to be of kind of a 2-year program, a 4-year program, maybe a 6 or 7-year program for advanced degrees, where you go, you're concentrated on getting a degree, and then you go into the workplace. This model is no longer feasible, nor is it even acceptable, especially in my world, in the high-tech world. The half-life of what you learn in a university in my world is maybe 4 or 5 years. I mean, I did my PhD in 1972. It's completely irrelevant to anything going on today. But the fact that we can get access to some of this content online, and we can do so at our leisure because we're not tied to a lecture schedule by the university professor, means that we can start delivering education in a different way in different units. We can have short courses. We can have certificate programs. People who are at work and need to learn new things can do so because they don't have to stop work and go physically to a university. So there is in terms of economics, not only do we have the residential students, young people who go to the university and are there for 4 years or 6 years or what have you, we also have this growing body of people who work who also need re-education. And that can be a new source of revenue for the university. So there could very well be that this restructuring actually opens up a bigger opportunity for revenue and therefore support.
But see, if you look at the university structure, when I went to university, you went to a particular university. You didn't really go for an expert, yes. Right? You went to Harvard University, you went to Cambridge University, and then you assumed that experts were sitting in there. Now you're shining lights on the experts. So what is going to happen is the power balance in the university is going to shift. The gentleman who runs that justice course in Harvard, Sandel, his power in relation to the university is completely different than it used to be. And if you can actually start giving access, direct access to these experts, will that superstructure of the university that controls them fold?
So you're asking an engineer a question, and you almost deserve the answer. So I'm not absolutely sure how this is likely to play out, but I will say that if the business models for generating revenue out of this shift away from the institution and towards the individual, that you're absolutely correct that the university is going to have to adapt to that somehow. One thing we used to do when I was teaching at Stanford in the 70s, we would record all the lectures on tape, and then the tapes would actually be sent out to places all around the world. They would be played, and there was a person in the room who acted as the teaching assistant and helped students to understand the lectures and to do homework assignments and the like. A little bit of that can happen in this environment as well. One thing that I have to tell you, I think I mentioned to you when we were talking before, I visited 2 of the IIT campuses, and I also visited a campus near our offices in Hyderabad of IIIT, a private university that was started 10 years ago with the considerable help of the state. This wasn't a federal action, it was a state. They provided land and buildings, and then they said, good luck. And these guys built a university, and they don't have departments. What they have is institutes focused on particular problem spaces. Now, I have to admit that I haven't quite figured out how to connect these two, your point and this one, except that by eliminating the department notion and focusing on expertise, in my view, they've transformed the way we think of that institution and its structure. And it seems to me that your point, which I take absolutely, is that the structure of the university and its purpose may change from a hierarchical structure of departments and department heads and so on into an institution whose job it is to facilitate that brilliant lecturer to reach a larger number of people. And it's the facilitating effect that allows the university to generate its revenue. But as I say, I'm an engineer and not a businessman, so I could be completely wrong. But I bet you there are a bunch of businessmen in here that'd be happy to try to figure out the answer to that question. Okay, lots of hands are going up. Let's make sure we get back and forth. Where's the microphone at the moment? Is there one way up there? Okay, let me get the guys in the upper nosebleed section.
My question is to Mr. Gandhi.
Oh, this is for you.
I'm in trouble. Yeah.
I am Virendra Singh from JNU. When I read the topic, the future of the internet, 1.2 billion empowered Indians, the first question which clicked in my mind, a few days back I was reading an editorial or some news was there in Hindu. It was saying that in some Indian government schools, some children who are even in the 8th class, they are unable to read or write 1 or 2 lines. Internet is a good thing and all, but it is a good thing for those people who are able to understand, who are able to write, read, and able to understand the data which is therein. How you are going to help those children who are not able to even understand 1 or 2 lines?
Can I ask you a counter question? How are you going to help them?
As a citizen, if I can give my 2 hours, 3 hours.
So not as a citizen, as a young Indian, how are you going to help them?
Actually, please answer my question first, then I will answer you.
Try. How would you help them?
Actually, my question, if I had any answer, then I would have not asked you this question.
No, but give it a try. Give it a try.
Let me think. It needs. Actually, I thought a lot, but I thought that I don't have answer, so I should ask Mr. Gandhi.
I think I think I've traveled quite a lot in villages, and I've seen many 8-year-old children. I think the discussion we're having here is how do you allow kids in villages access to an education system, access to a good teacher, access to a good school. There are two ways of looking at access. One way of looking at it is incremental. I'll go back to, Sam is sitting here, so I'll go back to Sam. They could have looked at telephones and said, we want to provide access to every Indian over telephone, and thought about it in a linear fashion. They would have never got there. They'd be sitting here right now, still figuring out how to get phones to Indians if they thought about it in a linear way. You can also think about it in an exponential way. What they essentially did was they came out with something called a rural exchange. And you must have all seen the PCO. You've seen a PCO? And that humble PCO that today looks, ancient, is actually what gave you the cell phone in your hand. Because it suddenly opened up the system to millions of people. And it didn't do so in a linear way, it did so exponentially. So there are two ways of thinking about these things. One way is to think in a rigid way and say, why, how do we do this in a linear fashion? And another way is to do what Mr. Cerf did, to think in an exponential way. I asked him today, where did you think the internet would go? He said, I had no idea. He said, basically I knew that I was solving a problem at that point. And then suddenly the thing just exploded. So to say that the internet is not connected to the 8-year-old child, you're cutting off a very, very powerful avenue. We don't know how it's connected. Let's first try and bring them together. And let that child, let his aspirations catch fire. So I think and it's frankly not up to me to do it. It's up to people like you to do it. And you got to stop asking your politicians how they're going to do it. And start asking yourself how you're going to do it. Because that's how this country is going to move forward.
And that's why he's a politician and you're not. But I mean, no, this is a very important question to ask because we have to solve that problem. You remember Kennedy's famous speech, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. I would say...
I've got a person in my office who came up with a brilliant one on another one of Kennedy's speeches. He's going to laugh when I tell you this. We were having a presentation about self-help groups and poor women in my constituency. And Kennedy had said that a rising tide raises all boats.
All boats.
And he says to me, but sir, poor people don't have boats.
Oh.
and those who have the boats,
yes,
their boats are tied to the bottom, anchored to the bottom. Anyway, sorry. Okay,
so actually there are some answers, by the way, to this basic question. One of them is to try to skirt around the illiteracy question, which is a serious one, by allowing people to engage in spoken interaction. And if you do spoken interaction and you show written answers also, you begin to gain knowledge of written language. We've seen this happen in the United States where captioned television was pushed by the deaf community, part of my world, and they really pounded the table on this in 1979, and the highest usage of the caption system was not by folks like me who are deaf, it was by people who wanted to learn English as a second language. and it was enormously helpful. So I mean, these kinds of ideas have a funny way of being used in ways that you didn't anticipate, and the Internet is certainly a good example of that. This nice lady is waiting over here. I guess we should turn the lectern over to you.
Oh, hello, sir. Just one of my question. My question is related to his question, okay? And as you have told that we should stop asking the questions to politicians. But, sir, there is one question that as you have announced, you have not announced, but the government has announced, the government of India had announced, last year they had announced that they will give a tablet known as Akash, which was the cheapest tablet in the whole world. But in the past 1 year, how many students have got that tablet? So you are very good, you are optimistic, this is very good thing, but when this plan is going to come on the ground, can I have
Frankly, I am not the person who's come up with the Akash tablet. You need to ask the gentleman who came up with it, and you need to ask him that question.
There are many people.
Yeah.
So can I respond also on this point? At any moment in time, some technologies are going to be too expensive. But the technologies that we're talking about have historically gone down in cost over time because the volumes have gone up and the learning curve has driven costs out. There was a time once when a mobile was a 6-pound piece of equipment. We call it a brick, and it costs $1,000. So physics is in our favor now. These devices and the communication systems and everything else are driving costs out, and they become more and more affordable over time. So I am very optimistic about this. And, sir, I will turn this back over to you.
So with your permission, I think I think we will, with your permission, I think we are now at 8:30. We had promised to stop by 8:15, and there are many people with many appointments and schedules who wish to leave. So let me now turn to the last part to my colleagues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Keeping in line with the theme of the discussion, we have also webcasted the event live across the world. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now at the end of this very interesting discussion. I request Mr. Gandhi to kindly present a memento to Dr. Vinton Cerf as a token of our appreciation for delivering the lecture.
Thank you, Mr. Gandhi, and thank you, Dr. Cerf. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you once again for the honor of your presence this evening. On behalf of the RGICS team, I wish all of you a very good night.
Thank you so much. I hope that was okay.